The scent of dry earth and sun-baked pine needles was the very first thing that registered, a visceral embrace that instantly transported Liam Chen whenever he crossed the worn cattle guard leading onto the Double C Ranch. It wasn't just a smell, it was an ancestral memory, a direct, unfiltered conduit to his grandfather, Elias Eli Chen. Eli was a man whose hands were as gnarled and calloused from decades of working the land as his heart was open and generous. He had built the Double C from the ground up in the rugged, sun-drenched foothills of Northern California, a testament to sheer grit, pioneering foresight, and an unshakable, fiercely independent spirit. For Liam, the ranch wasn't merely a parcel of property. It was the sacred ground of his idyllic childhood summers, a sprawling, untamed canvas for indelible memories. He recalled sticky-fingered afternoons spent fishing for trout in the meandering Cool Creek, the thrill of learning to ride a stubborn, mischievous pony named Comet, and countless evenings mesmerized by Eli's tall tales of prospecting and perseverance, all told under a sky so vast and star-studded it felt infinite. Liam, now 32, lived a life dramatically different from the ranch's quiet solitude. His existence revolved around the relentless hum of a bustling tech city an hour and a half away. As a gifted software engineer, he navigated the complex, abstract algorithms of code, a world away from the tangible, earthy wisdom of the land. His days were spent debugging intricate systems and developing cutting-edge applications, a universe apart from planting seeds or mending fences. Yet, despite the incessant demands of his burgeoning career, the Double C Ranch remained his indelible touchstone, the one place he instinctively retreated to whenever the city's cacophony grew too loud, too impersonal, too devoid of genuine connection. It was his sanctuary, his heritage, his quiet, whispered promise of a future rooted in something profoundly real and enduring. When Eli passed away peacefully in his sleep at 92, a true patriarch of the land until his last gentle breath, the stewardship of the Double C Ranch seamlessly passed to Liam. The will, meticulously drafted and unambiguous, made the succession clear. The ranch, with its sprawling 150 acres of oak and sagebrush, the rustic sun-bleached farmhouse, the weathered old barn, and every cherished memory it held, was bequeathed solely and unequivocally to his grandson, Liam. There was no lingering mortgage, no hidden debt, just a clear, unencumbered deed and a profound living legacy. The legal transition was remarkably smooth, a bittersweet process handled by a compassionate probate lawyer named Arthur Finch, who had known Eli for decades and respected him deeply. "Your granddad built something truly special out here, Liam," Finch had said, his voice thick with admiration, a hand resting gently on Liam's shoulder. "It's well outside the city limits, untouched by the county's new developments. Pure, untamed freedom, just like he liked it." Liam had nodded, a surge of pride mingled with a profound sense of responsibility washing over him. He spent the next few weekends meticulously going through Eli's old leather-bound journals, deciphering cryptic notes on crop rotations and weather patterns, planning small, loving repairs to the farmhouse, dreaming of future weekend retreats, and ensuring the perimeter fences were secure against wandering wildlife. The ranch was truly his, a tangible piece of Eli's soul now inextricably woven into his own. The first ominous sign arrived with deceptive subtlety, almost swallowed amidst a thick stack of unsolicited junk mail, discount coupons, and routine utility bills. It was a formal-looking envelope, stiff and cream-colored, with a return address he didn't immediately recognize. Summit Ridge Homeowners Association, Property Management Division. Liam frowned, his brow furrowed in genuine confusion. He tossed it onto a forgotten pile on his kitchen counter, assuming it was just another misdirected solicitation, perhaps a misguided attempt at property management for a neighborhood far from his isolated ranch. He was no HOA member, and he knew it. The Double C Ranch had always stood defiantly alone, a bastion of rugged self-sufficiency, miles from any planned community or encroaching suburban sprawl. Eli, his grandfather, had famously scoffed at the very idea of an HOA, referring to them with a characteristic snort as meddling busybodies telling a man how high his grass could grow on his own land. Liam understood that sentiment completely. It was ingrained in his very being. The ranch was, literally, miles from the nearest HOA-governed development, separated by rugged hills and undeveloped acreage. A month later, another identical cream-colored envelope arrived, but this one bore a stern, red second notice, immediate attention required stamp. Liam felt a vague sense of unease starting to prickle at the back of his neck. He opened it, pulling out a multi-page statement demanding quarterly dues of $350, alongside a detailed, almost comically petty list of violations. These included overgrown native brush along the northern property line, which was, Liam knew, simply the untouched wilderness Eli had always preserved, a non-conforming paint color on the barn, Eli's original, faded and beautifully weathered barn red, and an unapproved storage shed, which was Eli's beloved decades-old tool shed built with his own two hands. Liam let out a disbelieving, bitter laugh. This was beyond absurd. It bordered on malicious farce. He immediately called the generic phone number listed at the bottom of the statement, prepared to explain the monumental, obvious error. He was met with an endless automated system, then a perpetually busy signal, then a frustratingly generic voicemail that offered no option to speak to a human. He left a detailed message, explaining clearly that he was not a member, that the ranch was definitively outside their jurisdiction, and that this was a fundamental mistake. No one, of course, called back. He tried a few more times over the next week, each attempt ending in a crescendo of frustration and a lingering sense of powerlessness. He finally, somewhat reluctantly, dismissed it as a persistent, albeit baffling administrative error, perhaps a sophisticated scam targeting new property owners who might not know better. He shoved the letters into a drawer, convinced they would eventually cease, confident in the undeniable truth of his ownership and non-affiliation. But they didn't cease. They escalated, with a cold, relentless precision that sent shivers down Liam's spine. The next letter was a stark, menacing final notice, threatening immediate legal action and liens if the outstanding balance of nearly $1,000, including astronomical late fees and arbitrary fines, wasn't paid within 10 days. Liam's heart began to pound with a frantic, cold dread, a sickening premonition. A lien on his grandfather's ranch? The very thought felt like a violation. This was no longer a joke, no longer a simple, dismissible error. This was an active, malevolent threat, deliberately aimed at his cherished inheritance. He immediately drove out to the ranch that very weekend, armed with old family maps and a new sense of urgency. He meticulously walked the property lines, scrutinizing every marker, every fence post. He even spent hours online, cross-referencing public county records, zoning maps, and satellite images for Summit Ridge HOA to find their precise boundaries. Every single piece of evidence confirmed his initial conviction. The Double C Ranch was unequivocally and legally outside any HOA jurisdiction. There was no shared gate, no communal park, no joint road that connected them to their supposed community. Eli's property was completely isolated, its own self-contained world. He tried calling the HOA again with renewed desperation, even driving to the vague office address listed on the letter, which turned out to be nothing more than a nondescript P.O. box at a dusty strip mall. He felt a rising wave of panic mixed with an indignant, righteous fury. This wasn't just harassment. This was an organized, predatory attack designed to exploit and steal. He composed and sent several certified letters, each one clearly stating his non-membership and unequivocally demanding proof of any legal obligation. He included copies of his deed and the ranch's historical plat maps. No response. He even tried contacting the county recorder's office, hoping they could intervene, but they simply stated with bureaucratic detachment that any lien properly filed, even a fraudulent one, would show up in public records, regardless of its underlying validity, and they couldn't remove it without a court order. Then came the registered letter, the one that made his blood run cold, chilling him to the bone. Its official-looking header screamed, "Notice of foreclosure sale. Immediate action required. The Summit Ridge HOA, audacious and brazen, claiming an unpaid debt of a mere $1,250, had placed a lien on the Double C Ranch and was now proceeding with a non-judicial foreclosure. The sale date was shockingly close, just 3 weeks away. His inherited sanctuary, a property valued conservatively at over $500,000, a legacy built on generations of sweat and perseverance, was being threatened with sale over a paltry, entirely fabricated debt. Liam felt like he was drowning in quicksand, watching his most cherished inheritance, a piece of his very soul, slip irrevocably away. The sheer absurdity of it was infuriating beyond words, but the stark powerlessness he felt was terrifying, paralyzing. He spent those 3 weeks in a desperate, frantic scramble, working ceaselessly, fueled by coffee and a growing sense of panic. He called every legal aid office, every real estate lawyer, every consumer protection agency he could find in the wider Northern California region. Many dismissed him with a dismissive sigh, saying HOA foreclosures, even those with questionable claims, were notoriously difficult to stop once the process was initiated, often operating in a legal gray area designed to favor the HOA. Some scoffed at the very idea that a non-member could be subject to such a lien, yet offered no concrete advice on how to stop it. He felt like a lone man yelling into the deafening roar of a hurricane, his pleas lost in the wind. But time was a relentless, dwindling resource. He considered, for a fleeting, desperate moment, paying the $1,250 just to make the nightmare vanish, to prevent the irreversible. But a deep-seated part of him, the stubborn, independent spirit that Eli had carefully nurtured, rebelled with a powerful, visceral force. To pay would be to validate their fraud, to capitulate to opportunistic bullies, to surrender his grandfather's legacy to their avarice. He couldn't do it. His conscience wouldn't allow it. The day of the sale arrived with a sickly, oppressive pallor, the crisp autumn morning mirroring the profound dread that gnawed at Liam's heart. He attended the public auction, a knot of icy nausea in his stomach, clinging to a desperate sliver of hope for some miracle, some unforeseen, last-minute intervention. He stood rigidly in the small, indifferent crowd outside the county courthouse steps, his fists clenched, watching the auctioneer, a portly man with a droning, monotonous voice, rattle off the precise legal details of his grandfather's ranch, his family's multi-generational legacy. It felt like watching a public execution, each word a nail in the coffin of his dreams. The bid opened, a mere formality. There was only one bidder, a slick, anonymous-looking man in a cheap, ill-fitting suit with shifty, darting eyes. He bid precisely $25,000 for 150 sprawling acres and a fully functional farmhouse, a property valued conservatively at over $500,000. The gavel fell with a final, sickening, echoing thud, sealing the ranch's fate. The Double C Ranch was sold, just like that, in a matter of minutes, for a pittance of its true worth, over a debt he didn't owe, to an entity he didn't belong to. Liam felt an actual agonizing physical pain in his chest, a deep, guttural cry trapped in his throat, unable to escape. His sanctuary, his legacy, his very connection to Eli was gone. The emotional devastation was absolute, a crushing blow that left him breathless and broken. He walked away from the courthouse numb, hollowed out, the comforting scent of pine needles replaced by the bitter metallic taste of betrayal and profound loss. For a week, Liam was lost in a suffocating fog of despair and disbelief. The world around him seemed muted, distant. He barely ate, barely slept. The haunting image of the auctioneer's gavel falling with that final sickening thud replaying endlessly in his waking hours and invading his fractured dreams. His friends and family, worried and helpless, tried their best to comfort him, offering sympathetic words and silent embraces, but their gestures felt hollow, ephemeral against the monumental enormity of his loss. He felt an intense, crushing loneliness, an isolation born of the unique and cruel injustice he had suffered. But then, slowly, imperceptibly at first, the initial paralyzing shock began to crystallize into something harder, colder, something unyielding, a burning, unyielding determination. Eli hadn't raised a quitter. His grandfather had taught him resilience, integrity, and the fierce courage to stand his ground, to fight for what was right, no matter how insurmountable the odds seemed. This was his legacy, and he would not, could not, let it be stolen by a group of faceless bureaucrats and shadowy opportunists hiding behind fraudulent paperwork. He resumed his desperate search for legal help, this time with a renewed, almost furious resolve, armed with the cold, hard, undeniable fact of the sale. His case was no longer hypothetical. It was a devastating reality. He meticulously researched, filtering out the hesitant and the dismissive, until he found a small, highly specialized boutique law firm known for its expertise in complex property disputes and aggressive consumer protection litigation. His call was answered by Brenda Ramirez, a sharp, no-nonsense attorney whose reputation for tenacity preceded her, and who possessed an almost evangelical zeal for taking on difficult, often unpopular cases against powerful entities. When Liam, his voice still trembling with the raw emotion of recounting his ordeal, laid out his story, Brenda listened with an intense, unblinking focus that immediately put him at ease. She asked detailed, incisive questions, probing into every single notice, every attempted interaction, every dismissed warning. She didn't dismiss him. Instead, a spark of indignation, a familiar fire, ignited in her dark, keen eyes. "Mr. Chen," she said, her voice firm, carrying an undeniable conviction. "This sounds like a classic textbook case of predatory HOA practices, amplified by potential egregious fraud and conspiracy. This isn't just unethical, it's likely illegal. We need to fight this. And I assure you, Mr. Chen, we will fight this with everything we have." The legal fight began immediately. A meticulous, painstaking investigation that felt like peeling back layers of a deeply rotten onion. Brenda and her small, dedicated team dove deep into the murky, often opaque waters of the Summit Ridge HOA. They discovered that the HOA itself was relatively new, having been incorporated just 5 years prior, and had already amassed a disturbing history of aggressive, almost hostile tactics against property owners residing on the fringes of its supposed jurisdiction. They uncovered a clear systemic pattern: elderly residents, absentee owners like Liam, or those with limited financial resources being specifically targeted with a barrage of fabricated dues and fines, often for obscure or non-existent violations, which quickly escalated into liens and then swift non-judicial foreclosures for a minuscule fraction of the property's true market value. The buyer of Liam's ranch, it turned out, was not an independent party, but a deliberately obscure shell company named Ridgebrook Holdings LLC, with undeniable direct ties to a prominent board member of the Summit Ridge HOA, a man named Sterling Thorne. Thorne was a well-known, notoriously ruthless real estate speculator in the region, with a long-standing reputation for shady dealings and acquiring distressed properties through questionable means. This wasn't a mistake, Brenda concluded. It was a deliberate, calculated, and highly organized criminal scheme to enrich themselves at the expense of unsuspecting property owners. They pulled every available county record, every historical plat map, every deed and boundary survey. The Double C Ranch, just as Liam had always known and steadfastly maintained, was unequivocally outside the legally defined, recorded boundaries of the Summit Ridge HOA. It had never been part of any planned development, never voluntarily signed any CCNRs, covenants, conditions, and restrictions that would bind it to the HOA's rules, and therefore, Liam, as the lawful owner, was not and had never been a member. The lien itself was fundamentally fraudulent, based on non-existent obligations and fabricated authority. The notices, while appearing official and intimidating, were deliberately vague, misleading, and confusing, precisely designed to intimidate and overwhelm, not to genuinely inform or provide a basis for legitimate action. The entire foreclosure process was a charade, a meticulously orchestrated, illegal land grab cloaked in a thin veneer of pseudo-legal formality. Brenda outlined their legal strategy with crystalline precision, her voice firm and resolute. "Our core arguments are irrefutable, Liam. First, you are not and never were a member of the Summit Ridge HOA, so they had absolutely no legal authority to levy any dues or fines against your property. Second, the lien they placed was therefore invalid, fraudulent, and illegal from its inception. Third, the foreclosure sale was conducted unlawfully, without proper cause or any legitimate claim, rendering it null and void. We'll be filing a comprehensive lawsuit to quiet title, to invalidate the sale entirely, and to legally declare their fraudulent lien null and void. Furthermore, we will seek substantial compensatory damages for your emotional distress and significantly, punitive damages against the HOA and its crooked board members, especially Sterling Thorne, for their blatant, egregious fraud, their predatory practices, and their malicious intent. We will also seek to have the HOA's practices placed under strict court supervision. The court battle was arduous, a grueling 6-month marathon of complex legal filings, exhaustive depositions, and heated, often acrimonious arguments in a sterile, intimidating courtroom. The Summit Ridge HOA, desperate to protect its illicit gains and its very existence, was represented by a team of slick, well-funded corporate attorneys who mounted a flimsy, disingenuous defense. They argued with a straight face that Liam's ranch somehow benefited from community amenities, pointing to an unpaved, barely passable fire road at the very edge of their development miles away, and a storm drain project that was physically miles from the ranch. They tried desperately to paint Liam as a negligent absentee owner who had deliberately ignored legitimate notices, implying he was somehow responsible for his own misfortune. Sterling Thorne, when deposed under oath, was a masterclass in evasiveness and arrogant denial, feigning complete ignorance about the shell company, Ridgebrook Holdings LLC, and claiming the purchase was purely a standard business transaction with no insider knowledge. He oozed smugness, convinced he was untouchable. Liam's testimony, delivered with quiet dignity and profound emotional conviction, became the undeniable anchor of the entire case. He spoke eloquently, passionately about his grandfather, Eli, detailing the ranch as not just property, but a living sanctuary, a priceless family legacy, a repository of generations of hard work and love. He spoke of the crushing devastation of losing it to an illegal act, the weeks of despair, the feeling of betrayal. He presented Eli's meticulously kept journals, filled with sketches of the ranch, notes on its ecological history, and detailed records of its independent operations, clearly demonstrating its long-standing, self-sufficient status. Brenda, with her masterful command of evidence, presented irrefutable proof. Certified surveyor reports that precisely delineated the ranch's boundaries outside the HOA, historical plat maps dating back to Eli's original purchase, expert testimony from renowned property law specialists, and the damning paper trail, irrefutably connecting Thorne to the shell company and the HOA's predatory criminal practices. She brought forward other victims, now emboldened by Liam's stand, who bravely testified to shockingly similar experiences with the Summit Ridge HOA, solidifying the pattern of systemic abuse and fraud. The judge, a no-nonsense arbiter, known for her deep, almost encyclopedic understanding of property law and her intolerance for deception, listened intently throughout the proceedings, her expression initially unreadable, but as the case progressed and Brenda systematically dismantled the HOA's flimsy arguments, the judge's questions became sharper, more pointed, her gaze harder and more piercing, directed squarely and unflinchingly at the HOA's counsel and a visibly squirming Sterling Thorne. It became clear that she saw through their elaborate charade. The verdict, when it finally came down, was like a powerful, resounding hammer blow against the Summit Ridge HOA and its corrupt board. The judge ruled decisively and unequivocally in Liam's favor on all counts. The court found that Liam Chen was never at any point a member of the Summit Ridge Homeowners Association, and therefore the HOA had no legal authority whatsoever to levy any dues or fines, nor to place a lien on his inherited ranch. The lien was declared null and void, deemed fraudulent and without legal basis. The foreclosure sale was officially overturned, declared illegal, and void ab initio from the very beginning, as if it had never happened. The Double C Ranch was to be returned to Liam Chen immediately and without any encumbrance or further cost. The judge also awarded Liam substantial compensatory damages for emotional distress, recognizing the profound trauma he had endured, and, most significantly, massive punitive damages against the Summit Ridge HOA and Sterling Thorne personally, citing their egregious conduct, their blatant fraud, their predatory scheme, and their calculated malicious intent. The ruling, handed down with a stern warning about accountability and the sanctity of property rights, sent a shockwave through the local real estate community and HOA circles across the state, becoming a landmark case. The aftermath of the verdict was a whirlwind of profound relief, exhilarating vindication, and a renewed, almost spiritual sense of purpose. Liam, with the continued expert help of Brenda's firm, meticulously navigated the final, complex legal steps required to fully reclaim and re-register his ranch. Walking back onto the land, the familiar scent of dry earth and pine needles once again filling his lungs, the warm California sun bathing his face, was an almost spiritual experience. The old farmhouse, though briefly occupied by the opportunistic buyers and requiring some minor restoration, felt like home again, its familiar walls echoing with Eli's spirit. It was a place of deep healing, of joyous rebuilding, a sanctuary regained. The Double C Ranch, now restored to its rightful owner, stood as a powerful, enduring symbol of resilience, a tangible testament to the fact that justice, though often painfully slow, agonizingly arduous, and sometimes seemingly out of reach, could ultimately prevail against even the most entrenched corruption. The punitive damages awarded against Sterling Thorne and the HOA were substantial enough to effectively dismantle the corrupt board, forcing the beleaguered HOA into major restructuring under strict court oversight and requiring immediate, sweeping reforms to its governance and collection practices. Several key board members, including Thorne himself, faced not only significant financial ruin from the lawsuit, but also subsequent ongoing criminal investigations for fraud, conspiracy, and abuse of process, a direct and undeniable result of Brenda's diligent, relentless work and the intense public attention the landmark case garnered. Thorne's empire, built on exploitation, began to crumble. Liam didn't just rebuild his ranch. He fundamentally rebuilt a part of himself, a part that had been shattered by the injustice. The entire experience, though harrowing and deeply scarring, had also ignited a powerful, unwavering new passion within him. He became an outspoken, tireless advocate against HOA abuses, channeling his trauma into constructive action. Working closely with Brenda, whose firm dedicated significant resources, he helped establish and fund a robust community outreach program. This initiative provided free legal consultations, educational workshops, and vital resources for countless other property owners who found themselves trapped in similar predatory situations targeted by aggressive HOAs. He used his personal story, his newly gained public platform, and a significant portion of his awarded damages to educate property owners about their rights, to empower them with critical legal knowledge, and to give them the tools and courage to fight back against unjust liens and fraudulent foreclosures. The Double C Ranch, once a quiet, intensely personal sanctuary, now also served as a broader symbol of hope and resistance for a wider community. Liam still spent his weekends there, tending to the land with his own calloused hands, breathing in the familiar, comforting sense of his heritage. But now he did so with a deeper, more profound understanding of the complex battles fought and hard won, and the ongoing necessary struggle for fairness, equity, and justice in a world where even the most cherished legacies could be threatened by unchecked greed and illicit power. He was no HOA member, never had been, but he was undeniably a vigilant guardian of his inheritance and a tireless champion for countless others who might face the same unjust fight. His journey from victim to advocate forged a new, indelible purpose in his life, rooted as firmly in justice as his grandfather had been rooted in the land.